My Gavanen Melonin, and well met indeed. I'm Arachir Galadriel, and welcome back as we discuss another Rings of Power trailer. We've had a third trailer released, SDCC, absolutely no idea what that means, but it's a trailer to discuss, and there's some cool things to see here to my mind. Now, let me just cover some brief moments. Number one, and I'll mention this again, I'm afraid, in the video, so you're going to get bored to death of it, but number one, I try not to look up who the characters are before I watch the trailers because I think it's fun to try and guess who they are with my extensive knowledge. Number two, the show does not have the rights to the Silmarillion or Unfinished Tales or any of the extended literature. They only have the appendices to The Lord of the Rings, which contains the Tale of Years. So any of the first age shots are almost certainly going to be flashbacks because otherwise they're in contravention of their agreement, intellectual property law agreement, with the Tolkien estate. So that's where I erred in the last one by completely forgetting that and going on this wild, hype-filled fever dream that we might see some cool first age stuff. And we will see some cool first age stuff, but it will be flashbacks. It will be seconds long, I would have thought, because otherwise they will be in breach. So there's that as well. But otherwise, do sit back, let's talk about what we're seeing on screen, have a thought, have a guess at what we think we are seeing, and then at the end just discuss in a wider detail our thoughts on the trailer. I do hope you will enjoy. Alright, so as with every other trailer, we begin with wonderful establishing shots, but this time with a shot with a purpose. This is, to my mind, the closest likening of this I can find is the Hauth en Nerneith, which is an elven word which means Hill of Tears, from the Nerneith Arnoediad, which is a famous First Age battle called the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, named as such because the good forces lose, lots of people die. And the orcs gather the bodies of the dead and pile them up. Now, obviously, those are just helmets, but visually it's so striking to the description that we get of the Hauth en Nerneith, although it's not really big enough, but it evokes that emotion, and I wonder if they are just going to give it a quick little snap. Because remember, they do not have the rights to the Silmarillion, as I've been corrected on many times. They only have the rights to the appendices, The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. So all of this, these snapshots, I think they're going to be able to work because in the appendices of The Lord of the Rings is the Tale of Years, which gives a brief, almost one-line entry of all the things that happen throughout the years. And that, I think, is what they're basing it on, and that's how I think they're giving flashbacks, because a quick 30-second flashback of an event mentioned in one line probably doesn't breach their agreement. And so that's my thinking on that. But in any event, it's Galadriel obviously standing next to a mountain of dead elves, because those are all of their helmets. But it's again a striking shot, and again repeats the theme that Galadriel and then Elrond are likely to be the main characters for this show. We get a shot of what I think is probably Lothlorien. Now, the main reason for that is the Malorn trees. Malorn trees are famed for their grey bark. Of course, Malorn trees also do grow, I believe, in Numenor, if memory serves, and I'm sure there'll be 9 or 10 comments correcting me down below if I'm wrong on that. But I would guess that that is Lothlorien, particularly because of the presence of the dwarf and Gil-galad at the other end. And so perhaps Galadriel comes to Lothlorien at some point in the show. Also, with the dwarf's close proximity to Lothlorien, of course, out the eastern side of Khazad-dûm, that would make sense to me. So I would just guess that that's just an elven banquet in Lothlorien. It also, just having a look at that shot, it does remind you of Lothlorien from Peter Jackson's works, doesn't it? So my gut instinct is that is Lothlorien. There's just some shots of people being happy, which doesn't really mean anything. Boats sailing towards Numenor. And then you get Lenny Henry. I forgot Lenny Henry was even in it. You might not know who Lenny Henry is if you're not in the UK, but in the UK, Lenny Henry is a famous comedian. He hasn't really done anything for years. For most people nowadays, they know him as the guy from the Premier Inn adverts, and there's a load of jokes about staying at Premier Inns means you'll get a Lenny Henry visit or whatever. But back in the 90s, I think he was a big name in UK comedy. But nowadays, he doesn't do as much. But I just forgot he was in it completely, and it did make me chuckle when I saw him. But he's the only point in this show, in this trailer, where we actually get the suggestion of a hobbit, because I think he is going to be a hobbit, based on just his visual from all we see there. The fact he's quite clearly underground, there's grass coming down on the right-hand side. He's got that kind of unkempt look. I think he's going to be a hobbit. And as I say, this is the only time we actually see one, which is good. We get another shot of Numenor, and then we get the Palantir. And this is how I think we're going to get the flashbacks that we've all now seen and all now wondered how they're going to do them. And I think this is it showing us that very moment. So either Galadriel is going to remember aspects of bits that she's already seen, or she's going to see things that she didn't see. And that is what we're getting here. If I can also just again expand on my point, or just try and describe it more succinctly, because again, Tar-Miriel, the lady on the right, who many of you have corrected, I should state again, I've not gone to the IMDb wiki page because I like to try and see if I can guess who they are. It's fun for me. And whilst that might take away from the video for you a little bit, we all get to have a collective little guess at who everyone is. So I didn't know that was Tar-Miriel till last time you all flooded the comment section saying, Galu, that's Tar-Miriel. So, that's Tar-Miriel on the right. We'll come back to her in a second. But she pronounces Galadriel's name with a really trilled R again. And the thing that gets me about it is not that their name's being pronounced properly. I understand that. They pronounce a name properly, that's fine. But nowhere else do they speak Sindarin, and that's what I think is so silly about it. They all then just go back to speaking English, and you just think if the whole thing's going to be spoken in English, just say the names as the way that we would know them. It just stands out because it's so obvious she's not a native Sindarin speaker, and that I think is what gets me. It would be the equivalent of an English person in a show pretending to be from Jamaica or something. It'd be so obvious that they're hamming up their accent, and it just sounds wrong to the ear, and that's what we're getting here. I've no qualms, honestly, and my point last time was worded poorly. I've no qualms with anyone saying someone's name how it should be said, but with a fantasy language, when no one speaks that language properly anyway, it just sounds so silly to have the Galadriel like just thrown into the middle of it. Like, you can trill the R without it being that like ham-fisted. And honestly, listen to that point in the trailer again, and she just goes crazy with the trilled R. But then the other point is later on we get a guy say Sauron, and he says it exactly like that. And you think, well, it's double standards here, Amazon. It's double standards. Either you're going to roll those R's everywhere, left, right, and centre, or you're not. So why are you not rolling it? Why is it not Sauron? It just annoyed me. It just annoyed me. So anyway, Galadriel is going to get these flashbacks, to my understanding. And she is going to... That's how we're going to get all of this First Age stuff. That's how we're going to see all of this First Age nonsense. It isn't nonsense. It's going to be so cool to see it all, but I think the Palantir is how we're going to get it. So, then we come to Tar-Miriel, and a bit of a spoiler warning here. So, it's interesting that that's Tar-Miriel to me. Tar-Miriel is the daughter of Tar-Palantir, the 23rd or 4th king of Numenor. So right near the end of Numenor's reign. At this point in Numenor, this is a bit of a spoiler warning, sorry. They might not do this again, but if they do what the books do, this is what happens. By the end of Numenor's life cycle, elves are totally shunned out of society, and the Numenor is split into two divisive groups, the faithful and the king's men. The faithful follow the elves. Elendil is their leader. They live out, at this time in Ravenna, I think. But anyway, they live on a port in a very small section of Numenor. Almost everyone else in Numenor follows the king's men, and these are a group of people who have been led to believe that the elves are hiding something from them. This is before Sauron's influence, so they've come to this conclusion on their own. They think the Valar and the elves are hiding something from them. They come to the conclusion that the elves are sort of favoured, and they've got the secret of this and the secret of that, and that the Numenorians are being deliberately kept down and deliberately not being risen up to the strength of the elves. In brief, there's a lot more to it than that, but generally that's what you get. So they stop using Elven in everyday speech, they start shunning Elven iconography, and they change their names crucially into Ardenaic, which is the language of Numenor. They do not accept Elven names. And then, as I say, the 23rd, 24th king Tar-Palantir. Palantir means far-sighted. And he's named as such because he realizes what they're doing is a terrible mistake. It's going to lead to the downfall of Numenor, and he kind of repents, and he's the last Numenorian king to actually still follow the elves to some degree, and he's right before the actual downfall. So that's Tar-Palantir. He's a good, wise king. He realizes what they're doing is folly. But when he dies, his daughter, Tar-Miriel, under the ruling laws of Numenor, women can rule, and there have been 3 queens to this point. Most famous of them, of course, is Tar-Miriel, which is what my cat's named after. And Tar-Miriel should then be the next queen. But she is forcibly taken to wife by her own cousin, Pharazôn, who becomes Ar-Pharazôn, who is perhaps the most famous Numenorian king of all, because he's the one who actually leads to their downfall. Her name is changed to Ar-Zimrafel, and she becomes his reluctant wife until she dies with all the other Numenorians in the downfall of Numenor, despite the fact that we don't know if she was going to be good or bad, but the fact that her father was good and she was forcibly wed to her own cousin against her will, all signs suggest she would have been in the pro-elven camp. So that's Tar-Miriel. Her story is going to be sad. She's going to be forcibly wed to her own cousin, and he's going to become the king. So she should be the rightful ruler, but Pharazôn essentially usurps the throne by marrying her and becoming king himself. So that's her. I didn't realise that was going to be Tar-Miriel at the time. Now, the flashback there, with everything there we've seen before, except for this shot of Galadriel looking sad over a dead body. Let's just slow it down so that we can pause at the right time. And that is going to be the same person, to my mind. I think that is going to be Finrod. So, as you know, Galadriel has 3 brothers. Finrod, Aegnor, and Angrod, I think. Aegnor and I'm sure it's Angrod, but those 2 barely feature in the story. They're a total afterthought. But Finrod is a pretty main character, so the chances of that being Finrod are super high, because Finrod dies, as we all know. He dies defending Beren. I mentioned that in the last episode. And Galadriel would be sad that he's dead, which is then what we see. So I think that's going to be Finrod, and I think that's going to be her sad over his death. It could obviously be something else. This is all just my thoughts. I've watched this trailer twice. I like this fun game of trying to guess what everything's going to be. And I apologise if what you came to this for is an actual beat by beat. I want to know exactly what I'm seeing. But obviously with some of it, we just don't know. That could be a random unnamed elf for all we know, and it's just a shot of Galadriel being sad, but I doubt it very much. Then, of course, we get the White Tree of Numenor, because that's where the White Tree of Gondor, well, it didn't start there. It came from Tol Eressëa, I think. And then we get Eminem. Now, I don't think this is Sauron. I think this is a cult worshipper of Sauron. And we saw him just a moment ago on the cliff. That's the same person. I mean, I think that's obvious. And I would go out on a limb and say that's not Sauron. Primarily because Sauron's one of the characters from IMDb I have seen. But it could well be him, because I don't really remember what he looks like. We then get a shot of dwarves talking and Galadriel waking up in this inferno destruction thing. Again, no guesses as to what that is. And then we get a few shots of a dark-looking tower, which I think is going to be Tol Imgorhoth, the Minas Tirith from the First Age, which Sauron turns into his own Dark Isle. It could, of course, be Mordor. That's the other suggestion. But those are the only 2 places Sauron's ever really linked with. And I think that's going to be a flashback again to Tol Imgorhoth. Then we get that, which seems to be quite clearly trying to sort of shape as an eye. But it also looks like the hilt of the sword that we see in a moment. So, not too sure. But then this is the fellow that says Sauron without the rolled R and throws my mind. It's contrasting earlier when we get the rolled Galadriel. And then this is, I assume, going to be the first images in the trailer of the actual Sauron. But then, at this point, as I say, it would be so disappointing if Sauron isn't constantly gorgeous, and the show like does a real wool over your eyes, so that people that have never read the books will have no idea who Sauron is until someone literally names him. I'm really hoping they're going to go with a like red herring. So that person climbing out of the ground, which seems obvious to be Sauron, I'm hoping that that's going to be like a Nazgul or an orc or something. Although it couldn't really be a Nazgul because the show, I doubt the rings are going to be created at the start of the show. But anyway, so I'm hoping that'll be an orc or something. And then there's going to be some guy who appears every now and then, has the odd line, and in the first season, you're just not going to think at all that it's Sauron because he just blends in so well. I really hope they do that. It's such an opportunity to have a villain who's not out there right in your face. Look, I'm evil. I've got an iron crown that's got no eyes. How can you not tell I'm evil? So it gives them a chance to be really niche with their evil character and make him more blend into the shadows in a way that humans do. Have him a bit more like Grima, but not as overtly evil again. But I'm hoping that they do that because I think it will be cool. I'd be a bit disappointed if they didn't lean into the fact that Anatar, which is Sauron's form at this time, I'd be disappointed if they made him more like obviously evil. Like the Eminem guy. The Eminem guy looks evil. You look at him and you think, right, so you're an evil human. That's obvious. And I really hope they don't do that with Sauron. But we'll have to wait and see, because I don't think we see Sauron. There's the hilt of the sword, which I think is actually the shape we saw earlier, which I won't go back to because it's just, we see it again in a moment. But that seems to me to be a Morgul blade. That seems obvious. And I assume Sauron is using, maybe that kid is going to be a precursor to the Witch King. Because, of course, the Witch King comes from Numenor. And that's an area of the show that they can do what they want with. They can give the Witch King a backstory if they like, because Tolkien did not. And so it's open to interpretation. So it'd be interesting to see how Sauron goes. This is where we see that shot again, and there's that same carving. So I assume this is the elves, like, stumbling in upon Sauron's, like, workshop or something. I just don't know. And we get flame destruction, people looking sad, nothing really to comment here. And then there's the guy again, walking through, now orcs wearing prosthetics, which is good. And then the Oath of Feanor again. Hopefully that is what that is. Galadriel looking ready for war, and I dislike that as well. It's so obvious he's on ropes, isn't it? Look at the way he lands. You can see his armor doesn't land properly because the armor's attached to the ropes. This fella's going to be a main character as well, but he's entirely made up. And again, this is all from your comments that I've seen. He's going to be a Sylvan elf. He's called something like Arondir or something like that. And it's him that we saw in the pit from the previous trailer, as you all mentioned. There's Tar-Miriel again, and there's some dwarves crying out to the heavens. We've seen that lady before. Oh, and let's just briefly confirm your suspicions on that. That is almost certainly Mithril, as you say. That's definitely not a Silmaril, because it just doesn't look anything like a crafted gem. And it was folly of me to suggest otherwise, because it's blatantly obvious that is Mithril. And that's them finding Mithril, which ties into the end scene of the trailer, as we'll see. Galadriel riding with some armies. There's some orcs running through forests. No thoughts on that. Galadriel in the ocean. The ocean's another place where they can throw in some evil creatures. Because, again, Tolkien does describe that there are lots of evils in the depths of Middle-earth. And there's uncountable darkness. So having creatures in the sea, no, I don't think anyone would begrudge them that. I think that would be all right. And we see Galadriel swimming. It's literally just me telling you what you're seeing. Armies of Numenor marching out, which looks pretty cool, I have to confess. I liked the uniformity to the Numenorian armor, and I'm all there for the sun imagery. Give me more, give me more. And then the dwarf army marching as well, or at least a dwarf and its guardian. There's the mask again that I loved from the second trailer. Pleased with that. That fellow is Durin, I believe, the gingerhead chap. Yeah, and there's Arondir again in that pit that we saw from last time, confirming that it is indeed not the death of Finrod. Which is disappointing to me. And there he is again, Eminem. I don't think that is Sauron. I really don't think that's Sauron. And if it is, I'll be so disappointed. Because it's not from a lore purist point of view, but from a show uniqueness point of view. When was the last time we had a show where the villain was in essence hiding in plain sight? That guy is not hiding. He is clearly evil. Look at his pupils. Everything about him tells you that he's evil to the standards of modern human society, which is what the show will link into, because people will recognize it. And I think what he's doing here, judged on these veins running through the rocks, and again, this is a bit off, but I mean, if the show's good, the show's good. But I think what we're seeing here is him awakening the Balrog, because I'm fairly certain those are Mithril veins running through the mountain. The leaf lands down and it sets on fire in the darkness. And then, of course, in a moment, that theory is then backed up. So we see Arondir snatched by some orcs by the looks of it. He doesn't know what's going on. But then wait for it. Sit silently and wait, children, because there's more. There's more to see. More in the darkness. A Balrog of Morgoth. There we go. Boom Shaka Khan. So that would be in keeping with the show as well. The Balrog obviously rose up against the dwarves of Khazad-dûm, for they delved too greedily and too deep. But it did do it after the war of the elves and Sauron, which is the main theme of the show, long after the rings were created. So the dwarves shut their doors to the open world after Sauron had sacked all of Eriador and marched right up to the bounds of the Grey Havens themselves. He was then beaten back by a combined army of Numenor and elves, which defeated him. But the dwarves from then on pretty much shut themselves in the mountains and never came out again. And then later on, they awoke the Balrog, leading to them fleeing Khazad-dûm for obviously thousands of years. So seeing the Balrogs not really a problem. It just harkens to the main thing that I think the diehard fans are going to be really disappointed with this show. And that is, as final thoughts here, the show is condensing thousands of years of history into a single lifespan. So I think we are going to see, even though they happened at different times, we are going to see the creation of the rings, the downfall of Numenor, the rise of the Balrog, all in the sort of the show's runtime. And I think all of that is going to be in the lifetime of the show's characters, the show's human characters. So we're seeing what really took place over thousands of years. The rings were created, I'm sure the rings were created around the year 1500 of the Second Age, and Numenor falls in the year 3319 of the Second Age, so about 1,500 years earlier. And I'm sure it's around the year 1500 or 1000 or 1500. I can't quite recall. But anyway, it's at least 1,000 years worth of history that we're seeing condensed into the lifetime of a single human. And so I think a lot of people are going to take umbrage with that. I personally am not too bothered. And I'm... Oh, yes, Second Age 1500. That's when they began forging. Oh, yes, Galu. Got it right off the top of my head. Give me a round of applause. Right, so, yeah, we're condensing about 1,500, if not 2,000-ish years of history, because I can't recall when the Balrog awakes, because that's a really niche time to have in my head, because there's certain things that you're interested in, certain things you're not. But anyway, it's condensing a lot of time. I think a lot of people were disappointed with that. I personally, the only thing... That trailer, again, hyped me up. It's cool to see more Numenor. It's cool to see the White Tree. I like seeing the flashbacks with Galadriel. I like what we're seeing of the Galadriel character. I think she's going to be good. I'm pleased with what I've seen of Galadriel so far. Galadriel does have such a checkered past. She's been involved in so much stuff. And to just think of her as the elegant lady in Lothlorien at the end is so wrong. Her character has been everywhere and done everything. And it's cool that we're going to get to see some of that lifestyle. Or that life cycle, I should say. But for me, the only thing that I worry about there is please don't let that obviously evil guy be Sauron. Let that be a cultist, please. I really want Sauron to be hidden. I want it to be a shock moment for the audience when this guy who's had maybe one or two lines, he just seems to be a general advisor in Numenor. There's nothing about him that's special at all. We've seen the other version of Sauron, so you're all set up to think, oh, that guy's going to be Sauron. We know Sauron from the Lord of the Rings films. Because remember, this show is targeted at the film audience, not the book audience. Because the film audience is bigger. I'm sorry, the films were huge. They're a massive cultural phenomenon. People that read the books, whilst there's many people that will have read the books over the years, I think this show is definitely targeting itself at the absolutely cultural phenomenon that was the films. They had a much more of an impact than the books did. The books came out in the 50s and have always been low-lying background, discussed in the right circles, lauded as good fiction. But the films came out at a time where films are so impactful. So they're definitely targeting the films audience, to my mind. And for the film's audience, they know Sauron as what we've seen of him, the big suit of armor or the eye. So I hope that they're going to subvert expectation. They're going to set up Sauron to be this guy that you keep seeing only half bits of. You might hear his voice when the screen doesn't show him, things like that. And then actually this advisor in Numenor, this guy that you wouldn't think anything of at the end of the episode or the end of the series or the end of whenever, ideally at the end of the first season, would then reveal himself to us behind the scenes as that Sauron. Like, he does something that so then everyone thinks, oh crap, no, that guy was Sauron all along. Oh my god. Because I just think that you're missing a trick if you don't do that, because that's such a cool opportunity. Now, obviously, though, the only downside with that is that Numenor that wouldn't work with, because, of course, when Sauron's in Numenor, and again, spoiler alert, when Sauron's in Numenor, it's because he's been captured and taken to Numenor, so the Numenorians know exactly who he is. It's when he's an elf that we wouldn't know who he is. So allow me to just change that briefly. It's when he's creating the rings that the elves don't know who he is. Gil-galad, Galadriel, and Elrond all think something's off with Anatar. They can't really place what it is. So even the most far-sighted and gifted of the elves of that age don't actually know that it's Sauron. It's not until he puts the ring on that they know he's Sauron. They have suspicions of him, but they don't know that he's Sauron. And the other elves just lap it up. Of course, Celebrimbor famously working with him to create the rings. So I want Sauron to be innocuous. I want him to be inconspicuous, and I want it to be a reveal when we learn, holy crap, fires, that's Sauron. And hopefully we will get that. And I do feel strongly that fellow with the white hood, who just looks like Eminem, sorry. As soon as I watched the trailer, I was like, have they actually got Eminem? Is that actually Eminem? It looks so much like him. But I really hope that's not Sauron. It would be so disappointing if it is. And hopefully that will be one of the precursors to the Nazgul. That's quite a thought, isn't it, actually? Given the eyes and the way that he already looks like he's phasing into the Wraith world already, my hope would be that that is the sort of precursor Nazgul. Because remember, the Witch King is from Numenor, as are, is it 2 or 3 of the others? So there could be a number of humans who are devoted Sauron followers. And of course, most of Numenor becomes devoted Sauron followers. But I'm hoping that that might be a Nazgul. But we'll see. For now, that's your lot. Thank you for sticking with me. I do hope you've enjoyed this little rundown. Let's discuss it in the comments down below in a nice and constructive and pleasant way. But until we speak again, dear friends, Navair and Den Perimad Melonin, and farewell.